When the widow opened her back door and found a stranger leaning against the woodpile with blood soaking through one shoulder and 3 torn shirts clutched in his fist, her first thought was not mercy. It was annoyance. Supper was cooling. The lamp was low, and men with damage on them had a way of bringing more damage behind them. "Ma'am," he said, though his breath looked thin in the cold and his boots were muddy to the knee. "There's a child in your shed. Don't send us off till you've seen her." That was the only reason Clara Vale did not shut the door. She snatched the lamp from its hook, crossed the yard, and shoved open the little plank shed beside her mending room. A girl no more than 10 sat inside among sacks of flour, knees to her chest, chin lifted the way frightened children lift it when they are trying to look brave. A quilt square was twisted in her hand. Her cheek bore a fresh bruise. She did not cry. Clara turned back to the man by the woodpile. The smell of iron from his blood met the clean night smell of sage and frost. "I can mend shirts," she said, "not broken hearts." He looked at her for one quiet beat, as if he understood there was more truth in that than she intended to give away. "Then it's a mercy I brought both," he said. "Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. A story like this always feels warmer when we know who is sitting by the fire with us." Clara hated that she let them in. She hated more that she moved quickly once she did. Her mending room sat behind the dry goods shop she had inherited and kept alive with stubborn hands after her husband died. Bolts of muslin lined one wall. Coats waiting for buttons hung from pegs. A pedal sewing machine squatted near the stove like a black iron animal. The stranger sank onto the cutting table only when she pointed to it. The girl stayed by the door until Clara handed her a cup of water and a heel of bread. Then the child took both with 2 hands and drank like she had learned not to spill anything life offered. "Name," Clara said. "Boone Mercer." "The girl's?" He glanced over. "Wren." The child nodded once, but never took her eyes off the window. Clara cut Boone's shirt from the shoulder seam instead of pulling it over the wound. He did not flinch, though the fabric had dried into him. Under the lamplight she saw the hole high in the flesh, a crease from a bullet more than a buried lead ball. He had lost blood, but not enough to be finished. She washed it clean with boiled water and whiskey. He gripped the edge of the table while the stove popped, and the girl chewed bread in hard little bites. "Who is after you?" Clara asked. Boone's jaw moved once before he answered. "Ranchmen from the Crow spread. Maybe the sheriff if they got to him first." That name made her hands pause only a fraction. Crow. Of course it would be Crow. In a town this size, all trouble worth fearing eventually wore his shadow. "If you stole from him," she said, threading a needle, "you should have stolen a horse fit to outrun him." "I took a child, not money." That made Wren look up sharply. Boone saw it and softened his voice. "Took her away. Not from where she belonged." Clara set the first stitch through his skin. His hand crushed the table edge. He made no sound. Good, she thought, and hated that too. She had buried a husband who made noise when pain came. Since then Clara had learned quiet men were more dangerous than loud ones. A loud man spent himself in the room. A quiet man made space in it. Wren finished the bread, then crept nearer the stove. The bruise on her cheek looked thumb-shaped. Clara held out the cup again. This time the girl drank without being asked. "You got kin?" Clara asked her. Wren's fingers tightened around the quilt square. She shook her head. Boone answered for her. Her mother died in March. Her father before that. Crow's people kept her at the ranch house. Said it was for her care. "And you turned sane overnight?" A corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "No, ma'am. Just late." There it was. The thing beneath the wound. Clara felt it like a change in weather. She bandaged the shoulder, then went to the stove and set coffee grounds into the pot. The room smelled of chicory, damp wool, and the starch from folded linens. Outside, hooves struck the street hard and fast. Wren froze. Boone was on his feet before Clara could tell him to stay down. He swayed once, caught himself, and put his good arm in front of the girl. 3 knocks hit the front of the shop. Not a customer. Customers rapped. Authority pounded. Clara moved through the curtain into the shop proper and opened the door to Deputy Ellis Pike, hat in both hands and worry plain on his young face. "Evening, Mrs. Vale," he said. "Sorry to trouble you." "Then don't." His ears reddened. "Mr. Crowe says a dangerous hand lit out from the north pasture with a girl in tow. Says the man may come seeking food or doctoring. I do mending, deputy. Not miracles." He tried to peer past her shoulder. She shifted just enough to block the line. The lamp behind her crackled. "If you see anything," he said, "you ought to send word. Crowe says the fellow killed one of his riders." From the back room came the small, dry cough of a child trying not to be heard. Ellis heard it. So did Clara. For one suspended moment, she could have stepped aside. She could have pointed. She could have stayed safe, stayed lonely, stayed exactly as she had been since Noah died. Instead, she let irritation sharpen her voice into something almost believable. "That's my wash boiler settling, deputy. Unless Crowe's riders have turned into kettles, you are wasting my evening." He hesitated. Then, because he was young, and because Clara had once hemmed his burial shirt for his mother's funeral without charging him a cent, he looked down instead of past her. "Yes, ma'am." When he left, the cold came into the shop and lingered after the door shut. Boone was waiting by the curtain when she turned back. "You should have sent him in." "If I mean to do a foolish thing," Clara said, "I prefer it on my own authority. Sit down." Wren had fallen asleep against a stack of feed sacks, the quilt square still twisted in her fingers. Clara knelt to ease it loose so the child would not tear the cloth. As she unfolded it, the lamplight caught more than patchwork. It was not a rag from an old blanket. It was a careful piece of piecing and backstitching. Along one edge ran a line of tiny blue stitches in a pattern too regular to be decorative. Numbers, Clara realized. Or marks pretending not to be numbers. Noah had used stitches that way once to hide measurements in plain sight for customers who could not read. Clara's throat closed. Near the corner, worked so small another I might have missed it, was one word. Veil. Noah's hand, impossible and plain, carried into her room on a frightened child's quilt square. "Where did this come from?" she asked, too fast. Boone looked at the cloth and all color left his face beneath the dust. "Her mother gave it to me 2 nights ago. Said if we got clear of Crowe's men, I was to put that in the hands of Clara Vale and nobody else." "You knew my name?" "Not till I unfolded it by moonlight." Wren woke at the sound of her own name in the room and sat bolt upright. "Mama said the lady with the needle would know," she whispered. "She said the lady with the needle lost somebody too." Clara felt the floor go strange beneath her feet. On the back of the quilt square, hidden in the seam binding, she found the second thing. A tiny brass key, flat as a ribbon, stitched in so cleverly it would have passed through a dozen searching hands. Noah's trick. Noah's patience. Noah's ghost breathing at her shoulder. And with it came the certainty that whatever had killed her old life had not finished with her. The room, the shop, the careful narrow safety she had stitched around herself for 3 years all shifted at once. Boone saw it happen. "Mrs. Vale," he said quietly, "if that key opens what I think it opens, Crowe will burn this town before he lets us keep it." Clara closed her hand around the brass until the edges bit her skin. "Then," she said, hearing how calm her own voice sounded, "we had better be first." At dawn, Clara read the stitched code by the window while frost melted milky along the glass. Noah had always marked measurements in pairs, one true, one false, so no idler could make sense of them. By breakfast, she had the pattern. The blue stitches were not numbers alone. They were fence lengths, creek turns, and a half-mile note to the old survey line shack at Dry Willow Cut, the one Noah used before the railroad siding went in. Wren sat at the table, finally warm enough to look her age. Clara buttered a biscuit and set it by the child's hand, and the girl's careful gratitude broke something tender loose in her chest. "Did your mother tell you what the key opens?" Clara asked. Wren shook her head. "Only that Mr. Noah hid the truth where mean men don't stoop to look." Boone, pale but upright now, gave a dry breath that might have been amusement if it had not hurt him. "She's not wrong. Crowe's men search desks and saddlebags. They don't search quilting and hems unless somebody teaches them better." Clara cut a look at him. "And who taught them?" He accepted that blow without protest. "Once me." There it was again, plain in daylight. He told it while she packed cold biscuits, thread, the little colt Noah had insisted she learn, and a bottle of boiled water into a satchel. Years earlier, Boone had ridden as Crowe's outside foreman. He had been good with cattle, with rough men, and with obeying the sort of orders he could pretend not to understand. When Noah started surveying a disputed creek parcel for a widow named Hester Bell, Boone heard Crowe say the land would be his whether the lines agreed or not. Boone said nothing. Months later, when Noah died after a midnight trip to the freight yard, Boone still said nothing. Silence had paid his wages a long time. He wore it like another man's coat until it began choking him. Why steal Wren then? Clara asked. Because her father kept copies too. He was Crow's bookkeeper before drink ruined his nerve. He died last winter, and Crow took the girl into his house, where he could watch what her mother might know. 2 nights ago her mother sent for me. Said she had hidden Noah's key and needed one man left on that ranch who still hated himself enough to do one decent thing. Clara tied the satchel hard. And did she live long enough to see your decent thing? The shame in Boone's face answered before his voice did. No. Silence filled the room, broken only by the soft tick of the wall clock and the dry scrape of Wren's thumb over the seam of the quilt square. Clara wanted the easier choice. She wanted to hand the child to the church ladies, send Boone into the hills, and keep her life small enough that Crow's hunger passed over it. But the brass key warmed in her apron pocket like a command. Noah had reached from the grave with both hands. If she stepped back now, she would be stepping back from him as well. By mid-morning the town had the scent of trouble. Men stopped talking when Clara passed with Boone, and women counted scandal with their eyes. Even so, old Mrs. Lark pushed 2 currant rolls into Clara's basket and muttered, "For the girl," without asking whose girl. Deputy Ellis caught up to them outside the livery, worry written clear as print across his young face. "Mrs. Vale, you ought to go home. Crow's men are riding every lane. Then they can enjoy the exercise," Clara said. His gaze skipped to Boone. "You should leave town." "I will," Boone said, "when the child is safe." Ellis swallowed. There was fear in him, yes, but also the last battered scrap of decency a man keeps when he hasn't yet decided which side of himself to feed. "Crow's calling her his ward now. Says papers are coming from Cheyenne." "Crow calls a thing his the way a wolf calls a lamb supper," Clara said. Ellis lowered his voice. "If you're set on riding out, don't take the North Wash." 2 of Crow's hands are lying there with scopes. It was the first open help he had given. Clara saw Boone notice it too. "Thank you, deputy," she said. He looked relieved just to have done one honest thing before fear could undo it. They left the wagon by the cottonwoods and rode toward Dry Willow Cut, Wren in front of Clara and Boone on Ellis's borrowed bay. Clara noticed he checked the child before he checked himself. At noon they stopped beneath a stand of pines where the air smelled of resin and sun-warmed bark. Wren ate half a biscuit, then fell asleep with her cheek against Clara's skirt. Boone sat a little apart, cleaning Noah's old colt with slow fingers. "You knew my husband," Clara said. He did not look up. "By sight first. By shame later." "That isn't an answer." Boone finally met her eyes. "Your husband once offered me coffee after watching me do nothing while Crow threatened a smaller man. He knew what sort I was, and was kind anyway. That struck harder than any grand confession could have. Noah would have done exactly that." Clara rubbed her thumb over the ridge in the brass key. "Most folks think cloth tears where it is weakest," she said, watching Wren sleep. "It doesn't. It tears where it's been pulled too long." Boone sat very still. The line found its place between them and stayed there. When they reached Dry Willow Cut near evening, the line shack looked half sunk into the hill, roof bowed, door hanging crooked on one strap. Wind hissed through the bunchgrass. Inside, the place smelled of mouse droppings, old wood, and rain that had dried years ago. A survey tripod leaned in one corner under a tarp of dust. The brass key fit a narrow lockbox bolted beneath the shelf where Noah once kept his chain weights. Clara turned the key. Inside lay Noah's field ledger, a deed bearing the Tully name for the creek parcel Crow had fenced off, 3 signed statements from settlers whose marks had been forged, and a short note in Noah's hand. "If you were reading this, I was too slow." He wrote that Crow had been altering claims through the freight office and bank and begged her to take the proof to the county recorder and the Cheyenne paper. At the bottom he had added, "Kiss Tommy for me if he's still awake." Tommy had not been awake by the time Noah failed to come home. Fever took the boy 2 months after it took his father. She folded the note once, very carefully, and tucked it into the bodice of her dress. Outside, a horse snorted. Boone had his revolver drawn before the second sound came. Wren jerked awake. Clara stuffed the ledger and deed into the satchel just as a bullet punched through the shack wall and sprayed splinters across the floor. "Back window," Boone said. There was no back window. Only a square vent cut waist-high in the rear wall. Another shot. Then another. Crow's men had both sides of the cut. Boone shoved the tripod over against the door as a brace and looked once at Clara, once at Wren. "There's a dry wash west of here," he said. "If I draw them to the front, You take the girl and the papers through that vent and run low. And leave you? I ride better than I crawl. Clara almost laughed at the foolishness of that. Almost. What would you have done in her place? Trusted him or saved yourself? The men outside shouted for surrender. Boone cocked the hammer and said, very calm, choose quick. The storm's here. Clara chose in the time it took Wren to grab her sleeve. No, she said. We leave together. Boone's eyes flashed once, angry because he cared, and that too told on him. Then the door shuddered under a blow from outside, and there was no more room for argument. He fired through the plank beside the latch. A man cursed. Clara shoved Wren to the rear vent, kicked out the warped frame with the heel of her boot, and pushed the child through into the cold dirt beyond. Another shot split the wall near her face. Boone overturned the shelf. Papers flew. Dust thickened the air. Go, he snapped. She crawled through the vent with the satchel against her chest, dropped into sage, rolled, and came up on one knee with Noah's colt in both hands. Boone burst through after her and dragged the warped frame back across the hole just as the shack door gave way. Then they ran. The wash was deeper than Boone had guessed and steeper than Clara liked. Gravel slid under their boots. Wren stumbled once, recovered, kept moving. Above them riders shouted from the rim. A bullet whined off stone. Boone fired back without breaking stride. Short breaths. Hard ground. Fear like copper at the back of the tongue. At the bend where the wash narrowed, Darius Crowe blocked their path on horseback. Mrs. Vale, he said, hand over the satchel and the child, and I may still let you keep your little business. You killed my husband for lines on a map, Clara said. Crowe smiled. Your husband mistook decency for leverage. Boone mistook guilt for courage. Boone stepped half in front of Clara, gun steady despite the wound in his shoulder. Let the girl walk. You are in no position to bargain. Crowe's gaze shifted to Wren. Come here, child. Your mother made a fool's choice. No need to repeat it. Wren pressed closer to Clara instead. That small refusal changed something in the air. Crowe lifted his rifle. Boone fired first. Horse and rider twisted aside. Crowe's hat spun away. Two more shots came from the rim. One struck stone. One caught Boone low in the side and folded him hard against the bank. Clara's scream stayed inside her teeth. She fired upward at the ridge, not to hit, only to force the men to duck. Then she hauled Boone by the collar toward the shadowed cleft at the wash's end where spring runoff had carved a narrow opening into the hill. Wren grabbed his other sleeve and pulled with all the small strength fear could lend a child. Inside the cleft lay an old ice cave used years back by freight crews. The air turned instantly cold and damp. They dragged Boone beyond the mouth just as shots cracked into the rock outside. Twilight faded. The cave took them. Boone was white around the mouth. Outside, Crowe's men spread along the rim and waited. He'll wait till dawn, Boone said. Clara tore a strip from her petticoat and packed the wound while Wren curled in her shawl near the wall. Count my stitches, Clara told the child. Wren did until her breathing steadied. Boone gave a breath that almost laughed. You use sewing for everything. It has served me better than prayer lately. When the bandage was tied and the cave finally quiet, only the drip of water from stone and the far wind at the mouth remained. Clara sat with her back to the wall, Boone beside her, Wren asleep at last with the quilt square under her cheek. After a time Boone said, the night Noah died, I saw Crowe's men load him into the freight wagon. He was still breathing. He asked for you. I told myself I had no proof and no chance. What I truly had was fear. Clara closed her eyes. I spent 3 years thinking grief was the heaviest thing a person could carry. Then this child walked into my shed, and I remembered fear weighs more. Boone turned toward her. The heart doesn't need a hero, Clara. It just needs somebody who will stay when leaving would be easier. She took Noah's watch chain from her pocket and placed it in Boone's palm. Maybe I kept this because my hands were too full to take hold of anything living. He understood. In that cold cave, with danger waiting outside, warmth arrived anyway. She touched his face with the backs of her fingers, just once, and the door between them opened. If this story is moving you, leave us a like and subscribe. It helps us keep telling stories where loyalty matters. Dawn came thin and silver at the cave mouth. Crowe called in first, voice mild as church. Mrs. Vale, send out the child and the papers. I'll permit you and Boone to walk back to town alive. Clara rose, every joint aching from stone and sleeplessness. She looked at Wren, looked at Boone. Then she opened the satchel, took out Noah's ledger, the deed, and the witness statements, and divided them with calm hands. The original deed she stitched into the inside hem of Boone's least torn shirt using thread from her mending roll. The witness statements she folded into the lining of Wren's quilt square. The ledger she tucked beneath her dress, flat against her stays. "If he takes one, he does not take all," she said. Then she stepped into the light. Crowe had 6 men, Deputy Ellis among them, pale and sick-eyed. "Back to town," Clara said before Crowe could speak. "If you want these papers, you may try taking them wherever I can watch your hands." By the time they reached the square, Mrs. Finch had done her work. The church bell was ringing, and half the town was waiting. Clara climbed onto the watering trough because it gave her height, and because she was done speaking upward to men like Crowe. "My husband left proof," she said. Not shouted. Spoke. The square hushed itself to hear. He hid it in seams because he knew the truth outlasts men better when women keep it. Darius Crowe stole land, forged marks, and murdered the man who would not help him do it. Crowe laughed and reached for Boone. "A dying thief and a hysterical widow. Is that your case?" "No," Clara said. "This is." She nodded to Wren. The child stepped forward, trembling but upright, and handed Mrs. Finch the quilt square. Mrs. Finch ripped the lining with her penknife and drew out the statements. Amos took one. The preacher took another. 3 widows cried out at the sight of their husbands' names and false marks. Crowe lunged for the papers. Boone caught him once. Crowe drove an elbow into Boone's wound and broke free. Deputy Ellis moved then, not out of bravery, but out of the simple misery of a decent man who has waited too long. He stepped between Crowe and the trough and said, "That's enough." Crowe swung on him, with murder plain on his face. "You work for me." Ellis swallowed hard. "No, sir. I just forgot too long who the badge belonged to." Crowe reached for his pistol. Clara did not scream. She did not shrink. She snatched Boone's shirt from the rail where it had been thrown over a saddle to hide the blood and ripped the hem wide with her shears. The deed dropped into the dust at Crowe's boots. For one stunned beat, everyone saw it. Then Mrs. Finch bent, snatched it up, and read the grant line clear as Sunday scripture. The creek parcel belonged to the Tully child in trust, witnessed by no avail, recorded and sealed. Crowe's fence, Crowe's claim, Crowe's threats, all of it built on theft. Something broke in the crowd. Not fear. The rule of it. Amos stepped to Ellis's side. Then the preacher. Then 2 frayed hands. Then the widows, who had less strength but more fury. Crowe looked around and understood, too late, that wealth is only power until ordinary people stop bowing their heads at the same time. He drew anyway. Boone hit him low. Ellis kicked the pistol clear. Crowe went down in the dust with Boone on top of him and Amos grabbing one arm, while Ellis wrenched the other behind his back. The ranch owner cursed, spat, threatened, promised ruin. Nobody listened. He had spent too many years making other people's lives small. Now the whole square was done fitting inside him. By noon, Ellis had Crowe in the jailhouse. Mrs. Finch telegraphed the county recorder and the Cheyenne paper. The bank froze Crowe's accounts, and his riders began turning witness. The deed restored Wren's claim to the creek parcel. Clara became her guardian by week's end. Boone stayed to testify, then stayed because the porch board needed replacing, and then stayed because Wren slept through the night when his boots were by the stove. When the new sign went up over the shop a month later, it read Vale Dry Goods and Mending, and beneath it, in smaller letters, Wren insisted on painting herself, shirts done neat, hearts handled gently. On the first cold evening of winter, Clara closed the till while Wren dozed in a chair by the stove, and Boone swept the last tracked snow from the floorboards. The room smelled of cedar kindling, coffee, and wool warming dry. Boone leaned the broom aside, came to stand beside her, and laid Noah's old watch chain on the counter between them. She had given it away in the cave. He had polished each link bright. "You sure?" he asked. She looked at him, at the quiet steadiness of him, at the man who had finally learned to stay. "I am," she said. "The dead don't leave us by our loving the living well. If anything, they rest easier for it." Years later, when travelers asked how the widow who said she could mend shirts but not broken hearts ended up with a house full of laughter, a daughter who argued like a lawyer, and a cowboy who still listened more than he spoke, the people of town gave different answers. Mrs. Finch said truth finally found a tongue. Amos said bad men had overplayed their hand. Wren, grown tall and sharp-eyed, said Clara had always known how to mend hearts. She had only refused to call it by name until one winter proved that love is not some grand rescue. It is the daily, stubborn work of keeping what is torn in your hands until it learns how to hold again. Through the front window, under lamplight gold as honey, Clara threaded her needle while Boone leaned in the doorway with snow melting from his hat brim and Wren laughed by the stove. Next time, we'll tell the story of a mail-order bride who stepped off the stagecoach with a scar across her throat and no voice at all, and the widowed rancher who learned to hear everything she meant to say before spring thaw.